What if I told you that the people who seem the most powerful in any room are usually not the loudest, not the most aggressive, and not even the ones speaking the most? What if the real advantage in life, in conversation, in business, in conflict, in negotiation, has less to do with what you know and more to do with how well you understand people? And more importantly, how well you understand yourself, because that is where the game actually begins. Most people walk through life thinking intelligence is obvious. They think it looks like fast answers, sharp comebacks, credentials, confidence, or the ability to dominate a conversation. They think the smartest person in the room is the one who can prove the most, explain the most, or impress the most. But that's not how real power works. Real power is quieter than that. It shows up in restraint, in observation, in timing, in emotional control, in the ability to say less, notice more, and never give away more than the situation requires. The truth is, most people are easy to read. They reveal themselves constantly in the way they react, in the things they defend, in the way they rush to be understood, in the way they need to be right, in the way they overtalk when they're nervous, over-explain when they feel threatened, and overcompensate when they feel small. They don't realize it, but they're broadcasting information all the time. And if you know how to listen, how to watch, and how to remain calm while other people are trying to control the moment, you begin to see what others miss. You start noticing insecurity disguised as confidence. You start noticing weakness disguised as aggression. You start noticing motive behind language. You start noticing fear behind performance. You start noticing where the real leverage is. That is how you gain the upper hand. Not through manipulation, not through intimidation, not through pretending to be something you're not, but through clarity. Because when you understand human nature, when you understand pressure, when you understand how emotion affects judgment, and when you learn to control your own internal state, you stop becoming easy to influence. You stop getting baited into unnecessary reactions. You stop playing someone else's game. You stop trying to win every moment and start learning how to own the entire dynamic. And that changes everything. Because most people are operating from impulse. They are reacting instead of assessing, talking instead of observing, defending instead of understanding, pushing instead of positioning. They think power means force. But force is often what people use when they don't have control. Control is different. Control is the ability to remain steady when someone wants a reaction from you. Control is the ability to hear what is not being said. Control is the ability to let silence work for you. Control is the ability to recognize when someone is trying to provoke, distract, flatter, pressure, or test you. Control is the ability to respond only when your response serves your purpose. That's a different kind of intelligence. And if you want to outsmart anyone, that is the kind you need. So this is not about becoming cold. It's not about becoming detached. It's not about turning life into some constant psychological game. It's about becoming more aware. Aware of your own patterns, aware of other people's behavior, aware of what pressure reveals, aware of what silence does, aware of timing, motive, insecurity, manipulation, status, fear, ego, and emotional leakage. Because once you become aware, you become harder to control. And when you become harder to control, you become harder to defeat. So, if you want to outsmart anyone, start here. Not with them, with you. 1. Outsmart yourself first. Before you can read a room, before you can influence a conversation, before you can hold your own in conflict, you have to be able to manage yourself. That is the first challenge, and it is the one most people fail. People think the real battle is external. They think it's the meeting, the deal, the argument, the interview, the confrontation, the betrayal, the pressure, the person across from them. But the first battle is always internal. Can you control your emotions when someone pushes your buttons? Can you stay calm when your ego wants to defend itself? Can you stay clear when someone tries to embarrass you, undermine you, dismiss you, or provoke you? Because if you cannot, then you are not in control of the situation. You are being controlled by it. And that is exactly how people lose their advantage. Every time you react impulsively, every time you let anger take over, every time you become defensive, insecure, flustered, or desperate to prove yourself, you give away valuable information. You show someone where your pressure points are. You show them what threatens you. You show them what they can use against you. That is not power. That is exposure. And exposure makes you predictable. The person who can predict your reaction can shape the interaction. That's why emotional discipline matters so much. Not because emotions are bad. They're not. Emotions are data. They tell you what matters to you, what threatens you, what triggers you, what you fear, what you want, what you haven't resolved. But emotions are only useful if you know how to work with them. If you let them drive, they distort your thinking. Anger narrows judgment. Fear creates hesitation. Insecurity creates overcompensation. Pride creates blindness. Ego creates noise. And when you're operating from any of those places, you're not seeing clearly. That's why the calmest person in the room is often the most dangerous person in the room. Because while everyone else is reacting, they're collecting information. They're not trying to win the moment. They're trying to understand the board. And that is a major difference. Mental control doesn't mean you never feel pressure. It means pressure doesn't own you. It means you can feel your heart race, feel your jaw tighten, feel the heat rise in your body, and still remain composed enough to choose your next move deliberately. That pause is where your power is. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is where strategy lives. Most people never use that space. They collapse it immediately. Someone says something offensive and they fire back. Someone challenges them and they start proving themselves. Someone questions their value and they start talking too much. Why? Because they're trying to relieve discomfort. But when you rush to relieve discomfort, you often do it at the cost of your leverage. The stronger move is to stay with the discomfort a little longer than the other person expects, to let the moment breathe, to let your nervous system settle, to watch yourself before you respond. Because if you can master that, you stop becoming easy to manipulate. And this starts with brutal honesty. What rattles you? What makes you feel dismissed? What kinds of people make you shrink or overperform? What comments make you want to justify yourself? What kind of tension makes you talk too much? When do you become reactive instead of strategic? These are not small questions. They are essential. If you don't know your triggers, someone else will discover them for you. And once they do, they can use them. That's why self-awareness is not some soft skill. It's tactical. It's protective. It is one of the most important forms of intelligence you can develop. When you understand yourself, you stop getting hijacked by your own patterns. You catch yourself sooner. You recover faster. You reveal less. You choose better. And over time, people notice something different about you. They notice that you don't get shaken easily. You don't rush. You don't jump to defend. You don't react like everyone else. That changes how people deal with you. Because the person who cannot be easily provoked becomes difficult to control. And that's where real advantage begins. 2. Learn to read behavior, not just words. Once you gain more control over yourself, the next step is learning how to understand other people accurately. Most people think they're paying attention. They're not. They're hearing words, but they're missing behavior. They're reacting to tone, but missing motive. They're focused on what they want to say next instead of studying what is actually happening in front of them. And because of that, they miss the real conversation. Words matter, but words are not the whole message. People are always telling you more than they mean to. They tell you through hesitation, through over-explanation, through contradiction, through posture, through rhythm, through eye movement, through changes in breathing, tone, volume, and pacing. Human beings leak information constantly. If someone says they're comfortable, but their shoulders are tight, their breathing is shallow, and their answers are rehearsed, that matters. If someone says they respect you, but they interrupt you every time you speak, that matters. If someone says they're confident, but they need constant validation, constant attention, or constant agreement, that matters. Behavior always fills in the gaps that words leave behind. That's why observation is such a powerful skill. Not dramatic observation, not paranoid observation, disciplined observation. You want to notice patterns. Does this person answer directly, or do they circle the question? Do they get defensive quickly? Do they become overly charming when they want something? Do they shift tone when status changes in the room? Do they listen, or do they only wait to speak? These details are not random. They tell you how someone manages pressure, how they see themselves, how they see you, and what they may be trying to protect. Watch the eyes. People can control words far more easily than they can control timing and expression. Look for subtle inconsistency. Not one single tell like in a movie. Real life is more nuanced than that. Look for the delay before someone answers. Look for a forced smile. Look for eye contact that feels too deliberate. Look for someone who becomes unusually still when a specific topic comes up. Look for emotional mismatch between content and expression. Now listen to the voice. Not just what is said, but how it's delivered. A voice that speeds up under pressure. A voice that becomes overly formal when uncomfortable. A voice that rises in pitch when trying to sound convincing. A person who adds unnecessary detail to a simple answer. A person who repeats themselves because they're trying to make the story land. All of this is information. And one of the most revealing things you can do is watch people when they think they don't matter. How do they treat the server, the assistant, the junior colleague, the stranger, the person who cannot elevate them, reward them, or impress them? That version of a person is often closer to the truth than the polished version they present when they need something. This is where many people go wrong. They are too easily impressed by presentation. They confuse smoothness with honesty, charm with character, boldness with confidence, status with substance. But if you know what to look for, you stop being so easily influenced by surface. You begin to notice that some people use dominance because they lack security. Some people use humor to avoid depth. Some people use intellectual language to create distance. Some people use emotion to control the room. Some people use vagueness to avoid accountability. And once you see the pattern, you stop taking the presentation at face value. That doesn't mean you become cynical. It means you become accurate. Accuracy is power, because when you can read behavior, you stop getting fooled by words alone. You stop getting pulled into someone's performance. You begin responding to what is actually true instead of what is merely being projected. And that makes you far more difficult to manipulate. 3. Silence is a weapon most people don't know how to use. Most people are afraid of silence. They rush to fill it. They explain too much. They rescue awkward moments. They answer too fast. They give away information just to relieve the tension. And because of that, they lose control without even realizing it. Silence is uncomfortable for people who need reassurance. But if you can become comfortable inside silence, you gain something most people never develop: presence. Silence changes the structure of an interaction. When someone says something provocative and you answer immediately, you're moving on their clock. You're allowing them to control pace and emotional flow. But when you pause, even for a few seconds, you disrupt that pattern. Now they have to wait. Now they have to wonder. Now they have to sit with their own words. That creates pressure, and pressure reveals things. The person who was trying to dominate the moment may suddenly soften. The person who expected a fight may become uncertain. The person who assumed they understood you may realize they don't. That uncertainty is powerful. People tend to project into silence. They fill it with their assumptions, fears, and expectations. And if you are patient enough, they often start talking again just to relieve their own discomfort. When they do, they frequently reveal more than they intended. They over-explain, they justify, they backpedal. They try to clarify what didn't need clarifying. They expose insecurity. And all you did was wait. That's why silence is such a valuable tool in negotiation, conflict, interviews, difficult conversations, and moments of testing. It protects you from unnecessary exposure, and it encourages the other person to do more of the work. There's also something else silence communicates: confidence. Not fake confidence, not performative stillness, real confidence. The kind that says, I do not need to rush to prove myself. I do not need to respond on demand. I do not need to fill every space to maintain control. That energy is rare. Most people think influence comes from volume. It doesn't. Often, influence comes from emotional steadiness. Silence can also be used after a question. Ask something simple and direct, then stop. What do you mean by that? Why is that important to you? Walk me through your thinking. What changed? Then wait. Do not rescue them. Do not soften the question too quickly. Do not answer for them. Do not talk because the pause feels uncomfortable. Let the pause work. That is where people reveal thought process, contradiction, motive, and uncertainty. And in conflict, silence can be even more effective. If someone is trying to bait you, anger you, embarrass you, or dominate you, they are expecting energy back. They are expecting resistance, emotion, defensiveness, or escalation. When you deny them that, when you remain calm and measured, they lose momentum. Their aggression has nowhere to land. And when aggression has nowhere to land, it often turns back on itself. That doesn't mean silence is always the answer. Sometimes you need to speak. Sometimes you need to set a boundary. Sometimes you need to be explicit. But the point is this: when you choose silence rather than fall into it or fear it, it becomes strategic. It becomes a form of control. Because the strongest person in the room is often not the one who can say the most. It's the one who can say only what matters. 4. In conflict, don't just defend yourself. Study the other person. Conflict reveals character faster than comfort ever will. When people feel challenged, threatened, embarrassed, ignored, or blocked, their patterns become visible. That is why conflict should never be viewed only as a threat. It is also information. If someone comes at you aggressively, what are they trying to accomplish? If they challenge you publicly, why there and why then? If they become emotional, what are they protecting? If they try to provoke you, what response are they hoping to pull from you? These are the questions strategic people ask. Most people don't ask them because they are too busy reacting. They go straight into defense mode. They argue content instead of studying motive. They focus on the attack instead of the structure behind the attack. And when you do that, you miss the real opportunity. Because conflict can tell you exactly where someone is insecure, what they value, how they regulate themselves, how much discipline they have, and whether they rely on intimidation, confusion, pressure, guilt, or public perception to gain advantage. That is useful information. So when conflict happens, slow it down. Do not give the other person immediate access to your nervous system. If someone challenges you in front of others, the instinct may be to strike back fast and hard so you don't appear weak. But very often that is the trap. The faster you react, the easier you are to read. And the more emotional your response, the more likely you are to lose the larger position, even if you win the immediate exchange. A better move is often to force structure into chaos. Interesting. Be specific. Let's break that down. Are you questioning the decision, or are you reacting to the way it was delivered? What exactly is your concern? These kinds of responses do something powerful. They move the interaction away from emotional theater and into clarity. And not everyone can survive in clarity. Many people are strong only when things are vague, loud, and emotionally charged. Once they have to explain themselves, support themselves, and become precise, they weaken. That is why calm is such a powerful response to aggression. It forces the other person to do more than perform. It forces them to think. And many people who are good at confrontation are not nearly as good at thinking under confrontation. Another important point: conflict is almost never only about the surface issue. People rarely argue only about facts. They argue about status, control, respect, visibility, territory, insecurity, recognition, fear, and ego. A disagreement over a minor point may actually be about someone feeling dismissed. A public challenge may be about someone wanting power. An exaggerated reaction may be about shame. A passive-aggressive comment may be about resentment that was never addressed directly. If you only respond to the visible issue, you may miss the actual dynamic driving the behavior. So study the deeper layer, and then choose carefully. Sometimes the right move is a direct boundary. Sometimes it is a reframing. Sometimes it is a quiet note of consequence. Sometimes it is a refusal to participate in the drama at all. But what makes the response effective is not the wording alone. It is the state you bring to it. You can say very little and still communicate total clarity. That's not how I do business. We can continue this when it's productive. If there's a real concern, let's address it directly. I'm not going to engage with that version of the conversation. You do not need volume for authority. You need conviction. You need calm. You need control. And when other people see that they cannot easily pull you off center, many of them stop trying. Because the person who stays steady in conflict becomes difficult to move. 5. Think several moves ahead. One of the clearest differences between reactive people and strategic people is time horizon. Reactive people focus on now. Strategic people focus on what now creates next. This is why some people keep repeating the same mistakes. They are always responding to the immediate moment, the immediate insult, the immediate temptation, the immediate opportunity, the immediate discomfort, the immediate payoff. But if you only think about the present move, you become easy to trap. Strategy requires distance. Before you respond, ask, what does this lead to? If I say yes, what does that commit me to? If I react here, what does that train people to expect from me? If I win this moment, what might I lose later? If I stay quiet now, what does that allow me to see? This is where long-term advantage is built. The person playing for immediate relief often sacrifices leverage. The person playing for position is willing to wait. That patience makes them look passive to impatient people. But they're not passive, they're calculating. Let's say someone disrespects you in a professional environment. The immediate emotional move is to shut it down hard, right there in front of everyone. And sometimes directness is necessary, but not always in the way your ego prefers. Because there's a difference between defending your pride and protecting your position. Strategic thinking asks a different question. What outcome matters most here? Do I want to feel better for 10 seconds? Or do I want to preserve credibility, maintain influence, and move in a way that serves me beyond this moment? That kind of thinking changes your behavior. You stop taking every bait. You stop needing every point. You stop confusing reaction with strength. And this applies far beyond conflict. In relationships, it means you stop arguing for temporary victory at the cost of long-term trust. In business, it means you stop chasing short-term recognition at the cost of strategic alignment. In leadership, it means you stop speaking just to look decisive and start choosing timing more carefully. In negotiation, it means you stop revealing urgency just because silence feels difficult. People who think ahead are harder to pressure because they are not ruled by immediacy. They can tolerate pause. They can tolerate ambiguity. They can tolerate being underestimated for a period of time. That last one is important. A lot of people ruin their advantage because they cannot stand being underestimated. They rush to show their intelligence, their strength, their value, their capability. But sometimes being underestimated is useful. It lowers resistance. It reveals other people's assumptions. It gives you room to observe. It allows others to show their hand too early. Not every battle needs to be fought at the moment it appears. Sometimes the strongest move is to gather more information. Sometimes it is to let someone believe they have more control than they actually do. Sometimes it is to build influence quietly and move later with far more precision. That is what it means to think ahead. Not paranoia, not manipulation, position. And people who understand position are rarely caught off guard. 6. Stop trying to look powerful and start becoming hard to shake. One of the biggest mistakes people make is trying to appear powerful. They want to sound powerful, look powerful, win visibly, dominate clearly, be recognized as the strongest person in the room. But trying to look powerful often exposes the opposite, because the need to project power is frequently a sign that power has not yet been fully developed. Real power doesn't need to announce itself every 5 minutes. It shows up in someone who does not crumble under pressure. Someone who does not need every person to agree. Someone who does not overreact when challenged. Someone who does not panic when ignored. Someone who does not reveal their insecurity by constantly needing to prove their worth. That kind of person is hard to shake. And if you are hard to shake, people deal with you differently. They test you less. They trust your steadiness more. They stop assuming they can control the pace. They become more careful around you. Why? Because they sense that you are not operating from fragility, and that matters more than most people realize. Fragile people need constant reassurance. Fragile people need to win too visibly. Fragile people need the room to confirm them. Fragile people need quick emotional relief. But steady people can wait. They can let people talk. They can let people reveal themselves. They can walk away from useless conflict. They can say less because they know less is often stronger. They can maintain control because they are not negotiating with their own insecurity every second. That is why self-command matters so much. The truth is, if you want to outsmart anyone, your goal should not be to impress them. It should be to understand them better than they understand what is happening. That includes understanding what they fear, what they want, what they expect from you, what they are trying to get from the interaction, and how they behave when they don't get it. When you see that clearly, you stop being dazzled by presentation. You stop being intimidated by intensity. You stop being seduced by charm. You stop being rushed by pressure. You become more deliberate. And deliberate people are dangerous in the best sense of the word. Not because they are cruel, not because they are manipulative, but because they are difficult to move without their consent. That is real strength. 7. The real secret. Awareness creates leverage. If there is one thing that ties all of this together, it is awareness. Awareness of yourself, awareness of others, awareness of context, awareness of timing, awareness of pressure, awareness of what is being said, what is being avoided, what is being performed, and what is being revealed. Most people don't lose because they lack intelligence. They lose because they lack awareness. They do not realize when they are being baited. They do not realize when they are revealing too much. They do not realize when emotion has taken over judgment. They do not realize when silence would serve them better than speech. They do not realize when someone is acting from insecurity rather than authority. Awareness changes all of that. It allows you to slow down inside situations that used to control you. It allows you to read what others miss. It allows you to respond to the real issue, not just the visible one. It allows you to build leverage without noise, and leverage is what gives you options. When you have leverage, you don't have to force outcomes. When you have leverage, you don't have to explain yourself endlessly. When you have leverage, you don't have to chase control because you already understand where it lives. This is why the most effective people are often underestimated by people who don't understand them. They don't look frantic. They don't need to dominate every exchange. They don't burn energy trying to appear important. They observe, wait, and move with purpose. That composure is not accidental. It is built. It is built every time you pause instead of react. Every time you notice your trigger before it takes over. Every time you stay calm in a moment that used to control you. Every time you listen beyond words. Every time you choose strategy over ego. That is training. And over time, it changes you. You become harder to read, better at reading others, less reactive, more exact, less emotional in your decision-making, more intentional in your communication, less interested in proving, more interested in seeing clearly. That is the shift. And once that shift happens, you stop asking how to win more arguments, dominate more conversations, or prove yourself to more people. You start asking better questions. What is actually happening here? Who is emotional and who is clear? Who is trying to control pace? What is this person afraid of? What are they not saying? What response serves me best? Not just now, but later. That is the mindset of someone who cannot be easily played. Conclusion. So if you really want to outsmart anyone, remember this. It is not about having the last word. It is not about overpowering people. It is not about looking impressive. It is not about proving that you are the smartest person in the room. It is about becoming the person who sees more. The person who can master their own emotions before trying to manage anyone else's. The person who can read behavior without getting distracted by performance. The person who can use silence instead of being afraid of it. The person who can move through conflict without giving away control. The person who can think beyond the moment and play for position instead of immediate validation. That is a different kind of intelligence, and it is far more useful than most people realize. Because in life, the people who truly hold power are rarely the ones making the most noise. They are the ones who stay composed when others lose their footing. They are the ones who can listen while others rush to speak. They are the ones who do not confuse emotion with truth. They are the ones who know when to hold back, when to observe, when to challenge, and when to move. They do not chase power. They create conditions where power comes to them. So stop trying to win every moment. Stop trying to prove yourself to people who are studying your reactions. Stop giving away your position just because silence feels uncomfortable or conflict feels personal. Slow down, pay attention, control yourself, read the room, protect your leverage, think ahead. Because once you learn how to do that, you no longer have to force your way through life. You become the person who understands the game beneath the game, and that is what makes you difficult to outmaneuver. Not louder, not harsher, not colder, smarter.